because people who are working in this world, who are actively, doing the sexual violence response on campus, they're like, when we get a report or when we get like a critical incident like that, like we're not even interested in getting the police involved right away. We're not interested in looking at the policy. The thing we're interested in is making sure that the survivors are helped and that they're safe.
Welcome to another episode of Bunny Hugs and Mental Health. I am your host, Todd Rennebaum. Thank you for joining me for another week and another episode. It's another great one. This week I'm speaking with a friend of mine named Robin Hilton, and she's a pleasure expert and feminist sex coach / educator, and just a really great person. We talk about how mental health affects sex and how sex affects mental health, and just how the two are very connected. We actually ended up talking for so long, and we still didn't touch on everything that we could touch on. But it's a huge subject, sex and mental health and mental wellness and mental illness, that we're actually going to do. I had to split it into two parts. So this is part one. Part two, we'll come back to it. We'll come back in about a month or so and play that part so you don't get all wore out on sex. Because next week, it's another wonderful episode. I'm speaking with Jessica Buchanan, and she was kidnapped by Somalian land pirates in Somalia, and she spent 3 months out in the desert with dudes with guns who were looking to get a bunch of money for her. And she has a new book out, and we'll talk about that next week. The week after that, I'm talking with Ashley Collingbowl, and she is an Indigenous lady who is also a former, or she still is, a former Miss Universe. And she grew up on a reservation for a part of her life, and she was just dirt poor, and she talks about Indigenous life and some of the traumas and things she had to get through. And now she's a successful model and actress and all types of stuff. And then the week after that, I'm speaking with Jane, and she's a bit of a pioneer in the subject matter called maladaptive daydreaming. I'm kind of new to this. I just heard about it maybe 6 months ago or so, and it's basically the addiction to daydreaming. It's fascinating. Yeah, I won't get too much into it right now, but she's a wonderful guest and just a fascinating conversation. Please stick around after the episode. I'll be doing some jibber jabbering. I'll be talking about some upcoming stuff and maybe some comments and stuff like that. Before we listen to Robin, though, I just want to throw out there, if you think someone could benefit from this podcast, please tell people, tell your friends, share it. Share the podcast with folks you think would like it, who may be able to relate, who might get some help from it, who, it could use it as a resource of some kind or whatever. Yeah, please share. It'd be much appreciated if everybody that listened to this episode could tell 3 people about what a wonderful podcast it is. I hate asking for help, so, yeah. But I need some help. Anyway, without further ado, I give you Robin Hilton.
While I am a sexual health professional, I am not a mental health professional. So my thoughts are more around what I see folks struggling with when it comes to their sexuality, if in relation to their mental health, and it's a lot. I mean, and I could put it into a few different categories, but if we were to sort of do sort of an eagle eye look at the whole topic, it's first, how mental health impacts sexuality, how sexuality impacts mental health. And then also looking at, the impact of mental health treatments on sexuality, because that's definitely something that we probably as a culture don't talk about enough, and don't offer or seek out solutions enough for that. And then also how things like sexual and gender diversity how mental health is impacted because of the stigmatization, or because of, homophobia, transphobia, and how folks are impacted by that. So those are kind of like broad areas in which I see people being impacted. And then, we can kind of look into, if we were to look into mental health and sexual health, we look at like all of the different ways people experience difficulties in their mental health, or the mental health diagnoses, and how each of those interacts with sexual health in a totally different way. So it's a big topic.
Yeah. I figured. I thought,
Yeah.
this might even be a two-parter, or we may have to talk about
it. Like it's there's so much to talk about, and I think it's I just kudos to you for bringing this topic into the space, because I think it's, the more we can talk about it openly, the more we can ask questions, share stories, and create a space for comfort when talking about sexuality. I think the more we can open the door for people to have better experiences, both inside their mental health experiences, but also inside their sexual experiences.
Right. Well, thank you for the kudos.
Mm-hmm.
And kudos to you for doing this work, because I think it is important. And well, in a lot of ways, like mental health was kind of a taboo topic for a long time. It's getting a lot better, but I think sex still is, in a lot of ways, taboo. So I guess there is that commonality. So I'm trying to think of like what would be the first kind of
where do we
breakdown?
Go
Yeah. I'll just throw it out there. Like when I was a young guy in high school, and I already had kind of depressive episodes and anxiety and stuff. And then to be a virgin and like I see my friends having sex with girls, and like girls now, I grew up in a small town. So like the girls in the small town not really wanting anything to do with me because for whatever reason, it was a real, it was one of the reasons why I think I was having depressive episodes. Of course, there's a lot going on, but that was one of the things I think. Is that normal? Like a lot of young people have mental health issues because of they're not getting laid.
Yeah. Like, what's really interesting about that is I think like, first, just sort of what our expectations are around what it means to be having sex, right? And I think, again, it's like when ultimately we have a culture that is, I would say, not sex positive. It's pretty sex negative as a whole. And so we're kind of like tossed into this really strange relationship with sexuality, at a young age, where it's, we see it in like, in movies or on TV or like in advertising, there's a lot of media, but it's like a very particular kind of sexuality. Generally, it's very heteronormative. Like it's definitely, attract and like certain kinds of body types and certain kinds of people are attractive and certain kinds of things are attractive. So we have like this sort of media portrayal of sex and sexuality, and then we have a culture that doesn't actually talk about what it's really like to be in relationships and to be having sex and to be having sex as a young person as well. And so we in that space of first like having like expectation around what we should be experiencing. And then the second part of that is like shame, right? And shame just thrives in these spaces of isolation, right? Where we don't talk about it. And so then in our head, we create these stories around what it means not to be having sex, not to be in a relationship, not to be connecting with people in that way. And I think that's really where it starts to impact our mental health. And I think when you talk about like stigmatization around mental health, it's the same thing, right? Like you're experiencing struggles in your mental health, you see in like what people are supposed to behave like. And then if you're not experiencing that, but there's nowhere to talk about that, then you start to internalize all of that stuff. And then that impacts you in a negative way. And I would say anything that's stigmatized or has shame that goes along with it is going to probably impact our mental health in the long run when we're not having those conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think being already kind of susceptible to anxiety and depression as a teenager, that didn't help because I was very good at spiraling. Like, I'm 17 years old. I'm still a virgin. I will never have sex. And it's like, I'm 17. Like,
yeah, totally.
Easy, buddy. Easy.
Yeah.
You know? And
totally.
Yeah. And like the whole incel thing.
Yeah.
It's like young people can definitely, get comfort on the extremes. Right.
Yeah.
And that's why people join even skinhead groups and stuff when they're young, because they have that all or nothing kind of spiral thinking. And so anyway, I've heard some incel things. It's like, I kind of related. I mean, I didn't relate. Like I didn't want to go and, cause a terrorist attack, but I did feel like stupid pretty girls don't like me and stupid chads or whatever they call them. I don't know. But anyway.
Yeah. No, I think that's, again, it's our sexuality is just part of who we are. Like, it's not, we can't separate that out from who we are. And so when we don't talk about that stuff, we just open doorways for harmful and problematic influence to come in and to kind of hijack those feelings. And I think that pipeline from young I guess potentially like outcast or even young boys who are experiencing mental health struggles or isolation in any regard, like that pipeline from there into like, alt-right extremism, incel, all of that. Like, I think that's like something that we need to actually think about and talk about and pay attention to, because, you're right. When people feel like they don't fit in, that's the perfect opportunity for someone to, kind of swoop in and be like, hey, you could come over here. This is where you belong. And, finding that common enemy, which is women, right? For a lot of these young men. And that's actually really scary because it ends up just perpetuating misogyny and the harmful behavior that, that women, growing up as, as sexual beings have to deal with too, right? Like it's like this hypersexualization of our bodies and whatnot, but then also like the if we actively like want to engage in sex, it's like immediate like, oh, you're a slut, or oh, there's something wrong with you. So it's like, it's a lose-lose really situation for folks. And I think that's changing, and I see that when I go and talk to young people in schools and talk about sex, like they're pretty open and they're pretty curious and they're having sex and they're open about the fact that they're having sex, and young girls too. Like not young girls, I say that, I should qualify that.
Wait, what?
Teenagers. So, grade 9 and up, I've had conversations with, grade 9 students and up, and, they're open about the fact that they're having sex. And it's so refreshing to have those conversations where they can ask questions that, maybe they're not going to get answered, in like sort of traditional kind of like school settings or in a home. And it's like, these are important questions that help them to become, healthy or balanced sexual beings. So yeah, it's so much. I mean, we're just scratching the surface here, but when I think about one thing that sort of came up for me as you were talking is like specifically ADHD, because that's something that you talk openly about having, and like how one thing that, I certainly for me with ADHD that I've experienced is rejection sensitivity disorder, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
this idea that like you're always trying to mitigate people's perception of you, and you can't do that, right? Like you can't actually control how people perceive you, yet you're always in that sort of like game of trying to do that. And when it doesn't go the way that you think, or like you read like so much more into what people are thinking, like again, like, and that really plays out in like in relationships and in especially in sexual relationships. And then you add on to that, like, if someone does like have an interest in you, you add on to that like the tendency to hyper focus. So you can do that absolutely with a person too, right? And so then that person just becomes like your obsession. So like there's all these like things, these behaviors that like if you don't know you have ADHD, you're again going to internalize like why am I so weird? Like why am I like, and nobody likes me and no one, and that can really I think create long-term negative effects on mental health.
Wow. Thanks for saying that stuff, because that's another thing of ADHD I haven't like piecing, I'm living my life backwards now that I've had this diagnosis, and it's like I'm picking up all this stuff, and it's like that's something I never did pick up on was that, because I'm sitting here thinking back to my grade 12 girlfriend. That's like the first girlfriend I had, and it was like I think I was too much for her. Like I said, I love you, like after a week, and she was like, "Whoa," like easy, buddy. I was love bombing, but it wasn't like, red flag love bombing. It was ADHD, love bombing, and so we're both ADHD. So this conversation can be all over the place. But I interviewed someone that used to be part of Scientology. So cults kind of do the same thing, is that, this person's vulnerable right now. Like we're talking about young people that are like, vulnerable and they're hyper thinking and stuff. So it's like, bloop. And I also talked to a Columbine survivor who she does a lot of work with school shootings. And she said, like the young male, it's a young male problem too. And it's like, now as we're sitting here talking, it's like maybe if all these young dudes had sex with that, like stop school shootings, like I mean, like I'm kind of oversimplifying everything, but still it's like, but in a way it's like, who knows, maybe if these young dudes did have girlfriends, there'd be a lot less school shootings.
Well, I mean, this is like actually, no, I think like what you're touching in on is important, because it's like, I don't think it's necessarily that like they should feel like they like having sex might not be what helps them, but feeling normalized in their thoughts and their feelings related to sexuality or related to like, like big emotions.
Like connection and
right. Yeah. Yeah. Like intimacy, love, attachment. That I think if we were to like actually go there with young men, I think we'd have a lot more success in terms of, having them have like an outlet that wasn't violence, right? But yeah, like I think that that's like such a key piece to look at, is like how are we, how are we socializing young people? Period. Like, number one, we tend to, as a culture, really focus on like gender binary as a socialization. Like boys are this way and girls are this way. and not fitting into that can be really hard for folks. And then we tend to also socialize, it's funny because you see like, now this whole movement to like call like drag queens and people who are advocating for transgender rights to call them groomers, right? Yet it's like who is the one asking a young, like 6-year-old girl if she has a boyfriend yet?
I just saw a meme that was saying something like that.
100% that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's just so important to have those conversations about, how we're socializing young people into, ideas about like sex, sexuality, gender, and like sexual orientation that are super limiting and, putting people in these boxes. And, I think when you don't fit into that box, whether that's because you have, ADHD or like any kind of other, mental illness, or you are just don't fit into the box because you simply are outside of what we think, people should be like. Um, that is always going to be like a negative, like in sort of a net negative influence on someone's mental health.
Do you normally work with young people, or do you work with people of all ages with their was it sexual sex coach? Is that what you are? Your title?
Yeah. So I'm really lucky in the sense that, my work spans like quite a broad range. So I have my business where inside my business, I work generally with women who are like millennial, Gen X age women. And, because there's a lot going on for, millennial, not as much, but Gen X, like so much going on related to sexuality so I work with women in that age category in my business. And that's, most of that is focused on sexual desire, overthinking, that kind of stuff. And then my day job that I do is at for the University of Regina Students Union. So then I just teach sex education to university age people, young people. And that doesn't, there is like some Q&A and direct response, but it's more like just giving them the resources and, the safer sex supplies and the things they need to have, a healthy and happy sex life. One of the things that I do educate a ton about, which, I always say like my goal in my job is to never have to talk about this in university, but it's consent, right? I have to talk about consent like all the time because it's not part of the curriculum in Saskatchewan specifically for school age to even like consent, like unless they've got a good teacher who's going to talk about that, it's not a requirement in the curriculum to talk about consent. So, and pleasure isn't either. So, you have to have like a good teacher. And then I have people who reach out to me and say, hey, can you come talk to my class? Because a lot of teachers are expected to teach about sexuality and to teach their sex ed program. And they are like super uncomfortable with that. I had an incident last year where my daughter came home with like a question sheet from school. From her sex ed class. And it was like all like purity culture stuff. And I was like, what is this? What are you learning? And so she told me all the things that she had learned in this class with a teacher who was really deeply uncomfortable teaching about sexuality. And I messaged one of her teachers right away. I'm like, what is going on? And so the teacher brought me in to come and teach about sex in the same class so that they could ask their questions. And, they had great questions. And so, every once in a while I get to go do that. And we just do an open-ended Q&A. And honestly, that's like, if I could spend every day, all day doing that, I would be so happy. It's just some of the most rewarding work is just creating a space where, young people get to talk about, and their biggest question is, am I normal?
Yeah, that's
is
so
what
bizarre.
I'm experiencing normal?
Yeah. And I mean, young people have the questions, am I normal about every subject that you can think of in your brain? That's, well, actually, I talked to a gay friend of mine for the podcast, and I was like, I don't know if he said it on the podcast or if he just said it to me in general, but he's like, because I have 2 young boys, and it's like, so how do I get them to like, if they're gay, like, what do I do? He's like, you can't just be okay with them being gay. You have to let them know, like
Yeah.
if you are gay, no matter what you are, like, it's okay. We love you, and like, we're supportive, and not just in your mind be like, oh, it's fine if they are gay, if they come out gay, because they don't know. You like, if they don't know, then they don't know. So you have to tell them younger
Yeah.
that everything's fine and that you're
Yeah.
normal. And so just, yeah, that's amazing that so many young people have that question, like, is this normal?
Yeah.
And it is,
Yeah.
but no, and we just assume that they think it's normal, but because they've never heard that, they don't know. So yeah,
Yeah. 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 And, like it's really interesting because, like, one of the questions I got asked a lot from young girls is, they're concerned because sex is hurting. And it's like, because, pleasure is never taught in school. And, they're not taught how to experience like good sex or pleasure or what needs to happen. And then we have young boys who don't get the same thing, yet they do tend to look to pornography to learn about sex and to learn about, and so then they come in with this like sort of like totally incorrect idea about what sex is. Like, pornography is just entertainment. It's not a real depiction of sex at all, and great for entertainment, not so great for sex ed. Yeah, so we get these things, these situations where, they're not able to engage in a way that's like,
reality.
supportive. Yeah. And so then it's like, and then young girls are experiencing pain and they don't know if that's normal or not, and like, what can I do about it? And then, and they haven't heard like that there actually are like things like vaginismus, which can actually be causing them pain, and they would maybe even need to see a doctor about that. So it's like those kinds of questions. And then I just want to go back to, gotta love ADHD. I just want to go back to the conversation about coming out, because one of the things that, that I really feel, that I've really tried to do in our house is to create a space where my kids just didn't need to come out to me. That if they brought home a boy or a girl, wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter, because we talk all the time, about sexuality, not in heterosexual terms. And we talk about, gender, not in binary terms. And, it's like, for a good portion of the year, we'll hang a pride flag, maybe not in the winter so it doesn't get ruined, but like we'll hang a flag outside the house. And, like we would have, a space where it just feels like it's just as, it just doesn't matter. Like, who you are sexually is like who you are. And it doesn't, and I'd love to see that in the world, that it's like, it's not like a uncomfortable or awkward conversation to tell somebody that you are not heterosexual. Like, I think like me, that would be ideal, but that takes like a whole shift in culture, which I'm not sure that everyone is really ready for, but we need to. I mean, we need to just normalize these conversations and be open about it.
Yeah, I know someone I'm very close with. Their son is gay, and it was like they posted something on Facebook that made it obvious. And I asked their dad, I'm like, "Oh, your son came out?" He's like, "Well, no, he just is." Yeah. And I was like, and it took me a few minutes to like, what do you mean? I was like, oh yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, right. Okay. He's like, no, it's not like he was hiding anything. He just is.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really cool. The other thing is like, I've always considered like a sexual preference as like you unnecessarily have to label it, but I get it. Like, if like gay pride, and there's a lot of pride in it because of the turmoil from the past, but it would be cool to just like almost get rid of that label of gay, lesbian, whatever, because it's like, to me, it's like, if I only like really heavy women, it's not like I have a name for it, or or there's a
Mhm.
flag for it, or there's, all this stuff for it. It's like,
Mhm.
who cares? Like so
Mhm.
I like,
Yeah.
I have a preference of people I love and I have sexual desire for, and it's like,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I
And I
get it.
think
I get why there's that
yeah,
label, but
the one thing that I think, is really important to talk about is like, I think that identity, like really understanding ourselves in like, in terms of our like sexual identity, our gender identity, like those are like kind of key pieces to who we are. One of the things that I teach a lot, both to the adults that I coach and to the young people that I work with, is the importance of like things that we never really think about, or we never really learn about, or even explore yet, are like kind of foundational to our ability to see ourselves sexually, or to exist in the world as sexual beings. And it's like the first thing is our values, right? So being able to understand what our sexual values are.
I'm a 10.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
But when we grow up, right, like it, depending on what your family was like some people grow up with really, purity culture values, or like they grow up in the church. And so they've got these sort of like values that kind of hang over them as they're going about their lives. And if you never actually sit down to say, like, do I actually agree with those values? Like, you may be doing things in your life that show that you don't agree, but have you actually taken the time to define, like, what are your sexual values? And being able to do that can help you to kind of realize that you don't need to like carry the values of someone else with you into your relationships, into your sexuality. You can actually you can decide for yourself. So that's the first one. And the second one is desires, right? So that's where we talk about, like, it doesn't matter what you desire as long as it's consensual, as long as you're operating in a space of like co-created desire. If you're planning to do something with someone else, that you check in, but like what you want is important. And so if you want to, if you are attracted to a particular kind of body, it's good to know that. It's good to label that. It's good to understand that. If you are, if you desire to have sex with a particular gender, it's good to know that. Like, it's good to really get a sense of like who you are, because when you know what your values are and you know what your desires are, then you can really be confident in your boundaries, right? And you can say yes to the experiences that align, and you can then say no to the experiences that don't align. And I think that that's a really that's something that I think a lot of people are maybe missing. And like that's something, where we sort of lean into like the consent conversations, right? And we're able to more confidently ask for what we want, but we're also more confidently able to say, like, no, I definitely don't want to do that. So and all of that is, that ability to understand yourself. I think, if we were to kind of go back to that core of mental health, I think that's so important. When you're sort of jumbled up with everyone else's ideas of who you are, it can be really hard to like clearly find your path in the world.
Right. Yeah. I get it. I said it was like labels. Maybe that wasn't the right word, because
Yeah.
yeah, it's like with my own mental health. Like, someone was saying something the other day about ADHD, and it was a label and stuff. It's like, fuck you. I love that label because now I get it. It's
Yeah.
like, this is
Yeah.
me. This is my
Yes.
tribe. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
get it. And
There's a clarity in that, right? Like
yeah.
that, like this helps me to define, like, how I engage with the world around me. And that, that's important. And and I think like when we see that, like, even, in diagnosis, right? Like, it's important to get a diagnosis. I think, that's that I always thought, like, I spent so long kind of in a space of rejecting like kind of like what do you call it, science. In my early years of parenting, it was like so much of that time was sort of spent like wanting to like, oh no, like, the evil pharmaceutical, blah, 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 like I
Right,
spent
yeah.
so long in that space. And it was a real like eye opener for me to like, even when I got my ADHD diagnosis, I was like, I don't need meds. I don't know. I'm fine. Like, but like as I've sort of like grown up a little, and actually like becoming a sex educator was a huge part of that, because like evidence-based education is important. Like you need science to help people. and I like it dawned on me. I was like, oh, okay, diagnosis and like understanding who we are and like really like knowing our place in the world, super important.
Now, how many people do you talk to that has, what am I trying to say here? So sexual trauma, so someone that's been abused or
Yeah.
molested or been in a shitty relationship or, you know,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that whole stuff. Like
Yeah.
that must, or even someone who has a partner that's gone through that. That,
Yeah.
I mean, both people are then, affected
Yeah.
because sex is so important to mental health and vice versa. It's like, oh man, I just want to do this with my wife and I'm not asking much and she's, or he or whatever, or they or whatever. Do you
Yeah.
deal with a lot of that or have you come across a lot of that?
I always come across it. It's constant, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the key, for me in my work is that that I have to be trauma informed. I'm not a trauma therapist, and so I am fortunate to know some really great trauma therapists that I can refer people to when I need to. But it's, I would say, out of every 10 clients that come to me for support, 8 or 9 have experienced some kind of sexual assault or sexual abuse. It's, I mean, it is such, uh, it's way too common, and, the impact on sexuality is massive, and it can impact in so many different ways. And it's not something that just resolves on its own either, right? Like you need to I think it's, therapy, doing the work, getting the support out there is so key. One of the things, I attended something last week. It was about like how like universities can respond to like sort of more larger cases of sexual assault on campus. So I'm thinking like last year, oh, where it was, it in London? There was like at the beginning of the school year, there was like a big party, and there was like a whole bunch of like sexual assaults on campus. And I don't want to say the wrong school, but it was somewhere in Ontario. And so it was like, this huge big deal. And my mind immediately went to like, we need to punish this. We need to, like it meant to like, what is the school doing? Like, what's happening at the school? What are the policies? Like, blah, 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 blah. But I had like a huge reframe last week, because people who are working in this world, who are actively, doing the sexual violence response on campus, they're like, when something like that happens, like when we get a report or when we get, a mass, like a critical incident like that, like we're not even interested in getting the police involved right away. We're not interested in looking at the policy. The thing we're interested in is making sure that the survivors are helped and that they're safe. And I thought like, that, is how I think we can move forward as, to sort of mitigate those long-term effects, is like when something happens, our focus needs to be on the survivors. And that's something I think that's missing. And I think that's why so many of the people who come to me who've experienced some kind of, sexual abuse, sexual assault, even like, relationships where they were having sex when they didn't want to. I mean, that is like over and over and over again, like sort of a boundary is being crossed. And, when you don't, like, when those things like aren't talked about, when, you're keeping secrets, when, like when that stuff is so hush hush, you don't have that immediate trauma response and that support to integrate it right away and to like deal with the trauma so as to mitigate its long-term effects. So it's like, so I think, in my work, I see some of those long-term effects and how it's impacting relationships, how it's impacting how people feel about themselves and their bodies, and how safe people are feeling sexually. And there's things, that obviously, like, there's stuff that we can do, especially if someone has worked already on the trauma, like then we can kind of do some repatterning and healing and move forward towards healthy sexuality. Or I mean, I think that word is maybe loaded, but towards like a satisfying sexuality. I think that's possible, but yeah, it's a topic that is so, it's just too prevalent. It's too, it's too much.
Mm-hmm. And then you dig deeper and it's like how many of the perpetrators were also victims at one time.
Yes.
And then it's like, so then there's like, almost like a moral conflict. It's like, do I feel empathy or do I want to punish? Or it's like, it's so gross and just constant. And even like some of these young male shooters, like how many of them are angry, and the reason they're vulnerable is because of some kind of sexual trauma or whatever. And it's like, it's a big subject.
It is. And, it's funny. They like in the, I mean, that's not funny is the wrong word, but like in the call that I was attended the other day, that, they said like the one thing that they also do is like make sure that the perpetrator is safe and gets the support that they need. And my brain just went like, no, but like, it's just really about thinking more towards that restorative justice as something that's needed, as well in especially in like, well, really every place, but like I'm thinking like in a post-secondary institution, we have a lot of opportunity to to make big changes for people and to have people like rethink how they're engaging with one another.
So here's something I almost never talk about. That's been something I've come to terms with since being proactive in my personal growth. And it's something I rarely hear about. But as a young boy, actually, it started when I was really young, I was involved in sexual trauma with other boys my age.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know, it's weird. It's like, I don't feel like a victim. Like, I don't feel like I was perpetrated upon, but I do consider it sexual trauma because it fucked up my thoughts on sex. And like, what I mean? Like it was still traumatizing. And it was funny. It wasn't until I got sober and I started doing a lot of this work. So it's maybe been about a year that I've really even told anyone about it, because it was like it was just like that never happened. Or if I did think about it, it was just like, oh, it was just something that happened, whatever, like, push it aside. But it was like within the last year it started to feel like ouchy and icky, and it was like why is this bothering me now? Why is this coming up now? And why am I having to deal with it now? And like, what the fuck? Like, why aren't I, like, I've been working on myself for decades. Like, why is this now a thing? Now, why now? Why this now?
Yeah.
It's like, what's next?
Yeah, it's
it's like
that onion of healing. Hey,
yeah,
like one layer. Oh, get down to those roots.
Yeah, that's something I don't hear much about, is like the child on child, and like, it's not, like I said, it's not even a feeling of like being a victim, but I was a victim of trauma, but I wasn't a victim at someone's hand, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's weird. It went on for years, and it was like, oh, Robin.
Yeah.
Like some of it, yeah, I don't want to get too much into it because
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
I just don't.
hard. Yeah.
That and yeah, I don't, yeah, it's weird.
It's well, first, like I think um again, you I just need to say like the show and what you do um is so important. The conversations that you've had, the conversations that I've heard you have, and the things that I've heard you share, and the things that you share on social media. Um, this destigmatizing work and these conversations and like what you just said um, right now, um, like that's so important because there are people who are listening who are like, it's safe. They're, that they see, that there is some safety um, in starting to open up these conversations because that there's so many layers to why you would probably want to keep that kind of conversation like to yourself, right? And so many like but like to just open the door like that and to share, I think is like that's so powerful. And if at any point in time you felt powerless in those situations or you felt like that your agency or your choice was taken away, like it's, I think, also important to know that like that wasn't your fault.
Mm-hmm. I think the most fucked up part is I don't think I felt that way. It just,
Yeah.
it was, and that's the part I think I struggle with a lot is like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard. It's weird.
Yeah. And that's okay too, right? Like if you don't feel that, there's
I
still
feel like the
something.
perpetrator sometimes is what it feels like, honestly,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
which is the fucked up part.
Yeah.
Because when something feels good, especially when you're like a kid, and the same thing's happening all the way through up to like 17 years old, and then it's like, what the fuck? Wait a minute, was I? Maybe I was. I don't even know. Like I don't.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be honest. I haven't done a whole lot of work on this.
Yeah.
I've talked to
Yeah.
a few people, and they basically just said, you know, just be gentle with yourself. It happened when you were young, and it kind of fucked up
Yeah.
your whole the way you look at sex and stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so anyway, yeah, mm-hmm.
Which I think like would it have made a difference? And you don't have to answer this, and you can just say, okay, I'm done. But like, what if when you were a young person, like you were able to have like conversations about sex with adults where you could ask questions about what you were experiencing? Or like, like I think
Like I'm
where,
45 years old, and and like that question, am I normal? Like I'm still
yeah,
thinking that. Like, was this
yeah,
normal? Am I normal? What was like? Should I feel guilt or should I feel
right.
what's the opposite of guilt? Not like a victim, but like that. Should I feel like I had trauma? Is this?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't.
Well,
I know I'm not a perpetrator. I know I wasn't a perpetrator, but still, at times it's like I mean, I'm a weirdo. I spiral and I think of the worst possible things.
again, right? Like this is, I
I'm
think
victim
like
blaming myself, right?
ADHD. And let's talk a little bit about ADHD and sexuality. I think like we only scratched the surface. There's so much with ADHD and sexuality.
Okay, good, because I've heard nothing about this. Yeah.
Everything that we do as people, and again, like I'm super generalizing, like everyone has different experiences and different like ways of experiencing ADHD, but like I know for me impulsivity is like a big thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And pleasure seeking, because dopamine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, we're always like, okay, where's that next fix of dopamine, because it's like that's what helps you feel better. So like pleasure seeking and impulsivity kind of just go hand in hand. So, again, like when you are in when you're young and you're curious about your body and you're feeling these feelings, and yet like you have nobody telling you, how to interact with these feelings or how to engage in sexual relationships. Like, like when is that appropriate time to do that? Like, who do I want to do? Like all, like your conversations about sexuality aren't happening. If it feels good, that impulsivity very likely could take over, right? Like, so, and like, I see a thread of that through like my whole life in terms of like pleasure seeking behavior. My first year of university was a disaster sexually, in terms of of the things I engaged in, which were like, I would say very similar to what you're describing. I end up like in some guy's dorm room drunk, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this, but I'm here. But because it was like, I didn't have any really like guidance around sexuality up to that point. I just knew something felt good. And, so I think like that's, really when we experience things that, where we're like, am I normal? It's like we needed to be having those conversations like at a younger age, talking about like what, like encouraging us to self-explore, to masturbate, to like, to do these things and to understand ourselves sexually. But again, like because we live in such a sex negative culture and adults, like part of the reason why I do the work I do is to help adults feel comfortable talking about sex too, because I didn't always feel this comfortable having these conversations. It was always like a little bit awkward. But, as I've developed a comfort around talking about it, it's, I sort of do it with ease, but like, I know a lot of adults who don't. And so, most adults have young people in their lives who look to them for advice, who look to them for information. And so like, we need to change the culture around how we have conversations with young people so that, young people don't end up in situations where they're like questioning, like, is this normal? Am I normal? I mean, they're probably going to, but like they'll have like a little bit more information going into that. And I also think like, there is a in teaching young people about sex doesn't mean they're going to have more sex. They're just going to have sex that aligns better for who they are.
Yeah. I think that's what people are worried about, especially like, if it's like sex is bad in your religion or whatever, it's like, then it's bonkers.
Yeah.
We can't talk about that. You're teaching them how to do it, and then they're going to go out and do it. And it's like, no, they're going to go out and do it anyway.
They're going to do it anyway.
But now they're well informed.
Yeah, exactly. Like, anybody who thinks that young people are not sexually active. And like, I do want to say young people like Gen Z are less sexually active than we were. And they have more information.
I thought that the other day. When I was in high school, my hometown of Indian Head, per capita, had more teen pregnancies, had the most teen pregnancies in North America.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, there was only like 3 or 4 girls, but I mean, because of per capita,
it was a lot.
Like, yeah. And it was like a pandemic of teen pregnancies going on for like a decade.
Yeah, for sure. And that the rate, like teen pregnancy rates are dropping. Young people are drinking less. They're engaging in less risk-taking activity. And it's because we're talking about it. It's not, and we're doing our own healing as adults, right? And that's why young people are like feel actually equipped to make better choices than we were. Definitely, I think we've learned maybe from our questionable choices too. So.
Yeah, that's right. Don't do what I did. Yeah. I was uninformed. I want you to be informed. I have a friend of mine who has a daughter.
Yeah.
And he was talking to someone and he introduced himself or whatever. He's like, oh yes, I know you. You have that. You have a daughter and she's a real looker. And she must have got it from her mom because she's a real looker too. So the daughter is 9 years old.
Wow.
So this is like, I don't know, 50-year-old man.
Yeah.
And like when I hear a looker, I'm thinking you're sexualizing instantly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe not to the extreme that sexualizing can be taken, but still, it's like
Yeah.
that. And I was like, wait, what? Wait, like, why
Yeah.
is that? Women don't do women do that to boys? I don't think so.
Yeah. Uh, some maybe do, but you know what? It's like one of my absolute most favorite books of all time. And I always say this is like required reading for women, is Emily and Amelia Nagoski's book called Burnout. And it's about, they call it like human giver syndrome. And specifically, it's like because of the patriarchy, young girls and women tend to want to fit into this role of niceness and pretty and people pleasing. And so you see, like right away, like in this conversation between, a father, who definitely doesn't see his daughter in that way, I'm assuming, and this man is looking for like markers of gender that legitimize like this girl, right? Like it's like, oh, she's pretty, she's attractive, like that is her value. And that is the impact of like patriarchy. And like think, like that's one instance, but like young girls grow up with this like expectation for beauty and expectation for behavior like right from the get-go, and that hasn't changed, and that impacts like so when girls start to have sex or be in relationships, but specifically when they have sex, and I see this like a ton, those things are in the back of their head. So then they're having sex with someone and they're not actually in their bodies in the moment. They're like standing outside of themselves looking in and wondering if they're still like, am I a looker, right? Do I, is what I look like attractive to my partner in this moment? And are they enjoying, what they're seeing? Like that is the dialogue that, and not saying that men don't experience that too. But like definitely like that's something that, girls they are socialized to feel this way. And like I'm talking very like, in terms of like heterosexuality, because this is something that, more so occurs like, not to say it doesn't occur in relationships that aren't heterosexual, but like I would say like that again, when we're looking at heteronormativity, it's like there are certain sorts of like behaviors and expectations for women and for men, and those like expectations just sit in our minds, and then they come into our sexual experiences, and like that can absolutely 100% impact the way that someone is experiencing sex. The sex becomes like almost like you're just not there. You're not in your body. You're not, and so satisfaction, like having like even reaching orgasm or having like a satisfying experience becomes harder. And then it's like if you're not satisfied, you're probably not going to want to have more sex. And so then like that's where desire starts to like tank, because like you don't want more of what isn't that satisfying. So it's like when people are engaged in sexual relationships and the sex is not what they expect it to be, there's so many layers as to like why that might be happening. And it's not just performance. Like someone could be really great at sex but like not have satisfying experiences, or have a really great lover and not have satisfying experiences because of like all of that like baggage that we carry with us, like right from that young, age of like 9, living up to societal expectations of beauty and being like told that. And then it's like that, that sort of like sticks, that idea. So yeah, I mean, it's so problematic that happens. Like so problematic. Yeah, for so many reasons.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I always found like sex to be like cheesecake. Like when it's good, it is so good. And when it's bad, it's still pretty good.
Yeah. Pizza. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Robin. Robin and I actually are real life friends. And I've been thinking about doing this episode for a long time. And I'm glad I did. And she's just, as you could tell by her voice and her demeanor, and she's just a sweet, lovely person and very well informed, apparently, too. So that's good. We'll listen to part 2 in a few weeks, in a month or so. I don't know, in the future. But anyway, thank you, Robin, for doing that. I very, very, very much appreciate it. And I appreciate you, and I look forward to hanging out with you again sometime soon. Please check out the show notes. And in there's going to be everything Robin does and anywhere you can find her on social media or website and email, I think. Whatever. Anyway, it's all in the show notes, so check that out. Hey, this Monday, February 6th, I'm going to be speaking live on Instagram with a lady named Tara Nicole, and she's created a new website called Less Thorns, More Roses, I believe. I'm almost positive that's what it is. You just have to come and check out the Instagram to see the live and what her website's all about. I forgot to mention last week I did an Instagram live too with a lady named Amy, and she's a yoga therapist, and she was amazing. So I do have the video on my Instagram account if you want to go and check out our live conversation there. But yes, this Monday, February 6th, it's at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. I don't know what it is for other people, but that's what that is there. And while you're on Instagram, you may as well just start following me. That is Bunny Hugs Podcast. There's that. There's also Bunny Hugs and Mental Health on Facebook and Bunny Hugs Podcast on TikTok. And I got all types of stuff there. You can look at different memes and videos and reels. And now this week I got a really great comment from a lady named Christine on Facebook. And she's talking about the episode I did with Nigel. He's an ADHD coach from New Zealand. This was a few weeks back. She says, "Hey Todd, I'm completely overwhelmed by this episode. I'm 48 and have been suffering with OCD, depression, and anxiety my whole adult life. Some of the things that Nigel and you discussed really hit home. I've never held a job for longer than 3 years. In fact, my current employment is the longest I've ever stayed. It was also interesting listening to him talk about his compulsive spending and not being able to visualize an object to draw or paint. Also, his thoughts on dopamine and finding those little things that just make me feel better. I also struggle with separation anxiety and lack of focus on conversation and my hobbies. This whole episode was so very relatable to me. Thank you for all that you do. Your show has really brought to light that I'm not alone in this struggle with myself. I also want to say that it doesn't matter how many TikTok or Instagram hits you have. Your listeners are grateful for what you do, and we are listening. Peace and love." Thank you so much for that, Christine. And I very much appreciate that you're listening, and I'm so happy that you're getting something from the podcast. That's really what this is all about. So please, like I said earlier in the show, tell some friends about it and rate and review on Apple Podcasts. That'd be amazing if you could do that. Let's see what else is coming up. I kind of talked about upcoming guests. I don't really have any speaking gigs coming up right now. I am working on a pitch letter for more speaking gigs. I think I'm gonna actually seek out speaking gigs. I've done quite a few speaking gigs in the past, and it's all been people approaching me. So yeah, I think I want to do that more often. I really enjoyed my last few gigs. So anyway, I'm also working on getting some merchandise. I'm only one man. I have a day job somewhat as well too, so I'm trying to keep everything all together, and you never know, maybe someday I can leave the day job and just focus on this. But in order to do that, I need more speaking gigs and sponsors. So yeah, but anyway, I would love if you could just remember to make your beds and take your meds. Bye.